In 1942, late 1942, I was a junior in Brewster High School. And at that time, the federal government began a program to train officers for the Navy. It was called V-12. Now, I took the test, which they offered to all high school boys who were juniors. And I passed the test, which meant now go on to what it held for me. And they indicated that I would go to college, and for 16 months, 4 semesters, I would learn whatever they had to teach me, and then I would be in this officers training program following that, and it wouldn't take long following that period of 16 months that I would become an ensign. Well, as it turned out, I did not pass the 3rd semester. I got through the 3rd semester, but I didn't make it into the 4th. The captain of the outfit, I went to Middlebury, by the way. The captain of the outfit called me in and said, "Gee, we're sorry. We can't let you go on. You have flunked 3 subjects. We can't let this happen, even though you've done well and everything else." So I said, okay. And they sent me to boot camp, which was at Great Lakes at that time, Illinois. I went through basic training there, shooting rifles and jumping into fiery waters and all that kind of thing, which was part of the training. And when I finished that, they also gave us tests again. And on those tests, I was strong in certain communication skills. So they decided, let's send this guy to radio school. All right, so they sent me to the University of Wisconsin, where I went to radio school for 4 months, 5 months, I've forgotten what the length of time was now. And there I was able to get my communication through the dit-dit-das and all that kind of thing on radio.
The telegram?
Yeah, I very much like it, okay? With your earphones on, the material came in on the radio and we would type it out, whatever messages came in. Well, all right, now it was finished at the University of Wisconsin. It was time to move on to the next step, which was to go to Camp Shoemaker in California and there await a ship that would pick me up and take me out to sea. Now, by this time, it was probably March, April of 1945. Now, the war had been going on, since 1941, but really 42. So in 45, the war came to an end in that year. So they sent me out at a time that was not the most dangerous time for me to go out on board a ship. I was at Camp Shoemaker for almost 2 months. I had developed some kind of blister on my foot and they had to keep me. But in May, early May of 1945, they put me aboard a ship called the USS Olmsted, which was an attack troop transport. The job of this ship was to pick up soldiers or Marines and transport them from one place to another, wherever they might be needed. That was not a big deal. When we left San Francisco, the harbor of San Francisco, we were in a huge task force that was headed by Commander Halsey, and we went out. I don't know, but there must have been hundreds of ships at that time. It seemed that way to me. And we went out across the Pacific and we stopped at Honolulu. And there everybody did whatever business he had to attend to, and they sent our ship singly out into the Pacific for whatever assignment was figured for them. Well, the ship itself was about a 400-foot ship, good sized ship. And so from that point on, Brad, we traveled all over the Pacific by ourselves. We were never with anybody else, which was a little bit worrisome at first because we didn't know if there were Japanese submarines lurking in the waters around. And however, we never saw any Japanese at least I never saw any Japanese submarines. As far as I know, we weren't spotted by any Japanese submarines, which was even more important, okay? If they saw us, they didn't bother us. Anyway, we stopped at the Philippines, couple of times, Manila, which was bombed out. It was a terrible looking city at the time, whereas I assume today it's a lovely modern city. I don't know. We stopped at a place called Tacloban, which is also in the Philippines. We picked up soldiers, we transported them, and it was interesting because the ship had quarters for these fellows, and we'd sometimes carry as many as 1,800 or 2,000 of them, which was a lot of soldiers to carry on board a ship like that. And where they were quartered, sometimes the cots were strung up maybe 8 or 10 high, and 8 or 10 guys would be on these cots, one really above the other. As far as I know, none of them ever fell out and got killed, because the floor, of course, wasn't a floor. We called it a deck, which was steel. It would have been quite an accident if they had fallen out and hit that deck. But as far as I know, nobody got hurt. The only time that they had a hard time on board the ship was at a time that we hit a typhoon. And a typhoon is nothing less than a hurricane, except that in the Pacific it's called a typhoon. Same thing. And we were coming back, and the ship, I thought it was going to split in two. You know, we'd hit the waves and sometimes be 30 or 40 feet above the sea level. And the ship would come down with a crash and a shake. And at first I said, oh, well, this is it. I figured that was the end of me and the ship and everybody else who was on board. But the ship held very well. And after a while, for me, it was kind of a joy. I was up on the top deck where the radio shack was located. I was outside watching this thing happen. It was really quite a thrill to see it all. And, you know, when the ship landed and shook, of course the water would come across the bow of the ship and all the way across to the tail end, and go across 400 feet of water would spray over the entire ship. But it was fun watching it. Anyway, we stopped at places like the Philippines. We stopped at places which most people have never even heard of, a place like Ulithi, which was a tiny dot of an island in the Pacific. We even went down across the equator, and when we did that, by the way, there was a ceremony. The ship always has a ceremony when it crosses the equator, because there are a lot of people on board who have never been across the equator before. So they have a ceremony where a man, one of the ship's officers or whoever it might be, dresses up like King Neptune with the long, straggly, hairy hair, and he has his court around him. And the men who go across for the first time are initiated into this. The initiation is not very difficult, at least it wasn't aboard the ship that I was on, and they were very civilized in the whole process of the thing. But it was kind of fun. We were shellbacks now. We were officially people who had crossed this imaginary line. And we stopped at New Guinea. There were two places we stopped. That one was Lae, L-A-E, and the other one was Buna, B-U-N-A. They were nothing, Brad. They were really nothing. They were just little ports that we stopped at and dropped off soldiers or picked them up. I can't remember exactly what we did at those two places. There were several hundred miles, I think, between the one and the other. So once we did that, we went back to the regular work of what we were doing. On